Hey guys, and we're ready to do the first block for 2026. So this is January. The 2 Christmas tree blocks and the 3 little filler blocks down here, those are in your January folder. And then you also should have received the promotional folder that has the 2 little ornaments. So we can get all of these blocks done this month. So let's get started. Okay, so out of the block designs, remember we're going to be making 2 of each one. So I've already made the 2 ornament blocks. These are the bonus designs. I'm not going to do the video over these designs, but they're done the exact same way that the tree is done. So once we go through the tree, you'll be able to do these. They're just cut down to a 6.5 by 6.5 size. So the one that we're going to be doing in the video is the tree. Okay, so now as far as thread, I've updated my little box that I used last year, and so I've changed some of the color numbers. I am using some of the same colors that we used last year, and I haven't pulled all of the colors yet. I need to go through my stash at home and at the store and see what I have already open, but I did do up this chart with the different colors of thread. Now, some of them have 2 or 3 color options because I was trying to use some of the thread from last year, and then it just seemed like there were a couple of different colors that would actually kind of match and blend with the fabrics that they're using in the quilt. So we're just going to hover over this chart here for a second, and if you want to do a screenshot, or if you're here in class, you can take a picture of the screen, and that will help you pick out some of your colors. Now, this year I've decided, as for the quilting designs, I want the quilting to kind of show up a little bit. I don't want it to just blend into the fabric. I don't want it to be like pow showing up, but I want it to show up a little bit. So on this block, instead of using white for the quilting, I used the light gray color. And then on this one, instead of the white thread, I'm using this really light green color, and this was not one of the color choices that were on that chart. I just pulled this out of my stash. So the quilting is up to you. If you want it to show up a little bit, if you want it to show up a lot, or if you want it to blend into the background. So for our block, I'm going to use this real light green color. It is color number 6071 is what I'm using. Okay, so we're going to go into our designs on our USB stick. So I've made a 2026 folder on my USB stick, and then we're going to go into the January folder, and first we're going to go to the background quilting designs. And for the block, I'm going to be using the winter one. And so when we pull it up, it's going to be the one with the little houses and the Christmas tree. So then we got to go into the embroidery files, then into the block by block folder. Now, last year, at the beginning of the mystery quilt last year, I did in the video kind of explain how to pull these designs off of your USB stick from the computer and make it a little bit easier to find them. So if you want to watch that video again, it's just the January video from 2025. You can go back and watch that. But I'm going to go into the block by block and the PES. And for our Christmas tree, we want the 6 by 8 block. Okay, now, so far the Christmas tree and the ornament are exactly centered on top of this quilting design. So I'm going to go ahead and just push add and go get our Christmas tree design from the USB stick. It's back in the 2026 into January. This time, instead of going into the quilting folder, I'm going to go into the embroidery designs folder and get the Christmas tree. And it's just going to set it exactly centered in the block. And so I'm going to hit embroidery. Now, also, as far as the prep work for the fabric, in that same January video from last year, I explained how to starch the fabric. So you want to kind of starch your fabric. So I just sprayed the back of the fabric and then pressed it, and that starched it. And then to adhere the SF101 or the fusible backing, we spray the bumpy side of it with water and then press it and iron it and fuse it to the back side. And in the instructions for the Christmas tree, it did say to iron the SF101 or the fusible backing onto the background fabric and the applique fabric. On the ornament, it just said to do it on the background fabric, but I went ahead, I didn't want the little honeycomb design in the background fabric to show through, so I went ahead and I ironed the interfacing onto the back of the applique fabrics also. Now, I forgot to mention, in the embellishment kit, and I'm going to show you kind of a picture of the embellishment kit here. Here's the embellishment kit you're going to be getting today at the first meeting, and it is full of just all kinds of fun stuff. There's all kinds of different textured fabric, ribbons, bows, bells, buttons, just all kinds of fun stuff. Now, each bag is labeled for the month that we're going to be using it for. And for this month, we're going to be using the promotional bag and the January bag. Now, we won't actually be using anything in the January bag because all of that you will put on after the quilt has been put together. But for the promotional block, we'll be using what's in the promo bag. So in the promo or the promotional package, you're going to have two little green pieces of kind of a velveteen fabric that you're going to be using in the promotional block. So that's in your embellishment kit for the bow there. Now, if you were in the Mystery Quilt last year, you know I do the block by block quilting just a little bit different. If you're new, FYI, I do it a little bit different. So I'm going to show you in the video how I do it. Now, in the instructions, I am going to show you this. They're not going into as much detail really this year, and it does say, like on the block by block quilting, it's telling us here that the design's going to be centered in the middle of the block, but then it also does say to refer to the quilting on the applique-threadwork blocks or Technique 1 section in the guide. That guide you have received with your download, or it's going to be on your USB stick or wherever you've downloaded the designs to. So if you want to refer to that guide, you can, or do it my way and watch the video. So we're going to do it my way. So my way is pre-cutting the batting, and so I'm going to insert a picture here of how I'm going to cut these batting pieces. Here is the picture of how I'm going to be cutting my batting for the blocks, and I'm using the Kimberbell project batting that is the 19 inches wide, which in the picture it's that's the at the top and at the bottom, 19 inches, and then it's 3 yards long. I'm going to be cutting the blocks lengthwise along the length of the batting instead of using that 19-inch side, and that way when we get to the borders and the sashing, I'll still have some long strips that I can use
for the borders and the sashing.
Okay, so for my block for the Christmas tree, I've cut me 2 pieces that are already the finished size, that are the 6x8, and then for the promotional block, I cut me 2 squares of batting that are the 6x6. For the filler blocks, I've cut me 3 pieces of batting that are 2x2. So what's going to stitch off first is going to be the placement line for the batting, and I have hooped up a piece of the poly mesh stabilizer. So pretty much for all of our blocks for the whole year, we're going to be using poly mesh stabilizer. Okay, so what Kimberbell has you do is to lay just a bigger piece of batting down, and then it stitches a tack down, and then you're supposed to trim the batting. My way of doing it is I've already cut the batting to the cut size, the finished size of the block. So it's the 6x8. So I don't need to stitch off the next tack down line, and I'm using that light green color that I'm doing the quilting with. That's what I've threaded up with, so it may be kind of hard to see, but it's just stitched a 6x8 rectangle on the poly mesh. So we're going to come over to the machine, and I'm going to forward down through the tack down for the batting. I don't need that. And so what's going to stitch off next is going to be the placement line for the fabric. And so what I'm going to do while it's stitching that, I'm going to take my batting piece and my background piece that has the SF101 pressed to it, and I'm going to spray both of those with the 505 spray. So I just have this box, and I just lay the background fabric down right side down, lay the batting down, and then just spray it with the 505 spray. Or if you have like the 505 glue stick, if you like that better, you can use that. Okay, so I'm going to lay the 505 sprays on the back side of the batting, and now I'm just going to lay that inside that batting placement line, and see that leaves that 1/4 inch seam, so when we stitch all this together at the end of the year, we won't have that batting in our seam allowance. And then the fabric is cut oversized, so you just lay that, kind of centering it over that fabric placement line. And then what's going to stitch next is the fabric tack down. So now we're just got to do the quilting design, and that's going to take a little bit, but this design's really cute. It's got little snowflakes and houses and Christmas trees, and kind of show the screen. When I was trying to pick out what color I wanted to do the quilting, I thought about doing it in kind of a light tan color, because that tan is in the background block. But I just thought that would really bug me if the snowflakes were brown. And so that's when I found the light green color. And I think it shows up just enough. Okay, I do want you to notice how the way Kimberbell labels their quilting designs. The one that we're using for the Christmas tree, it's labeled a 6x8 design. That is going to be the finished size of our block. So once it's sewn into the quilt, it's going to be 6x8. But they've added the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around it. So the actual dimensions of the quilt design and the size that we're going to cut our block down to is 6.5 by 8.5. So when that design pulls up on your machine, it's named 6x8, but the sewing area is actually 8.5 by 6.5. And then the same thing for the square blocks. This one is named 6x6, but the actual size of the quilt design and what I've cut this block down to is 6.5 by 6.5. Now, it's finished doing the quilting, so what it's going to stitch next is the placement line for the tree. And normally you would want to go ahead and thread up with the color that you're going to use for the cover stitch to match the tree, but because I've already stitched one of these, I know what's going to happen is it's going to do the placement line, I'm going to lay the fabric down, it's going to do the tack down, I'm going to trim the fabric away, and then it's going to stitch the trunk first, and then it's going to come back and do the cover stitch. And because this cover stitch is a big wide satin stitch, it's going to cover up that placement line and tack down. So I've gone ahead and threaded up with the brown color. I'm being lazy, and it saves me one color change. Now, you don't want to do that necessarily when the cover stitch is like this little decorative stitch. You really want the placement line and tack down thread to match your fabric or match the thread that you're going to be doing that little decorative cover stitch with. But because this one's a big wide satin stitch and I'm being lazy, I'm threading up with brown. So it's going to stitch the placement line first. So now I'm ready to lay the fabric down, and I'm just going to take the 505 glue stick and just kind of put a little bit there to hold it, and maybe a little bit on my fabric. I sprayed that one, and then when I went to trim it, I got 505 spray all over my fingernails. So lay that down over the placement line and then stitch the tack down. And stitching this in the brown, it helps you see that tack down a little bit easier. When I did it on the other block in the dark green color, it was kind of hard to see. Oh, I really know. Watch that. Make sure you cover your placement line good. It does stitch the tack down twice so that it has a little bit more security when you go to trim the fabric away. Okay, so now we're ready to trim the fabric. So I've taken the hoop off the machine. You do want to be careful when you're taking your hoop off and on, when you're trimming all your fabric, kind of hold on to the bracket that's there on the machine as you slide the hoop off and you put the hoop on, because you don't want to accidentally move that, because that'll get your design out of place. And then I'm just using the little double curved scissors. You can use these, we have the Ginger pairs that we use, just something that you can get up underneath there and butt the blade up against and just trim as close as you can to the tack down. I may need to move it over there so I can lay it. And I usually try to have the piece, the applique piece that is staying on the fabric, I have that to the top, and then I just butt my scissors, that bottom blade, up against the stitches, and then that helps me trim it pretty close. Okay, so I can see on my machine in the little preview window here that what's going to stitch next is going to be the trunk. So just kind of watch your machine and it's going to go through the steps. So we'll stitch that part of the design before we thread it up with the green for the cover stitch. So once it's done with the brown, then I just thread it up with the dark green color, and it's going to do the satin stitch all the way around. And this is going to take about 11 minutes, so we will be back when it's done. Okay, so we have the second Christmas tree done, and before I go trim this down, I'm going to show you how to cut it down to size. We still need to do the 3 filler blocks. So the Christmas tree and the ornament, you're going to do 2 of each. The filler blocks, you're just going to do 1 of each of the 3 different fabrics. So now instructions, you can see they used matching thread, and the quilting doesn't really show up all that much. So what I'm going to do is on this block, I'm going to use the red. The dark green, I'm going to use kind of the medium green thread, and then on this one I'm going to use the pink. So maybe the quilting will show up just a little bit. Now on the instructions here, it is telling us that we've cut the fabric to 3 by 3, and then we're going to go get into the bows 2 folder. We're going to be getting the 2 by 2 design, which is actually 2.5 by 2.5, and that's what we're going to cut the blocks down to. Once we're done, we're going to trim them to a 2.5 by. We're going to trim them down to 2.5 by 2.5. So for our filler blocks, we're going to go back into our 2026 folder, the January. We're going to go into the background quilting, the bows this time, and embroidery, the PES, and we want the 2 by 2 with the bow going upright. Now we need 3 of these. You could do each one individually in like your 4x4 hoop, but I've hooped up the 6x10 hoop with the poly mesh, and so I'm just gonna like move this one up, then I'm gonna duplicate that, move it down, duplicate that one, and then move it down so I can do all 3 of them in one hooping. And then when I get to the embroidery screen, I'm not going to sort the colors. So sometimes we will sort the colors and have it stitch out like all of the placement lines and then all of the tacking for all 3 of them at one time. But because I'm doing each one in a different color thread, I'm going to do each one individually. So I've threaded up with my dark green thread first, and so it's going to do that top one. I'm not dark green, the medium color green. It's going to do the placement line for our batting, and we're going to do this the same way. Instead of laying a bigger piece of batting down and then tacking it and having to trim it, I've cut the batting already to the finished size, which is the 2 by 2. So I'm going to go and forward through that, or bypass the tack down for the batting. Now it's going to stitch the placement line for the fabric, and I can go spray these with the 505 spray. So now I'm just going to lay the batting down within that batting placement line, lay the fabric on top of that, centered over that, and it's going to stitch the fabric tack down. And now it's gonna stitch the quilting. So I'm gonna do that in the medium color green also, so it'll show up a little bit. Okay, so I'm ready to do the second one. So I've threaded up with the red thread, and it's gonna basically just do the exact same thing. Placement line for the batting. Landry's watching us and she thinks this is fun. Now I'm going to forward, bypass the tack down for the batting, and stitch the placement line for the fabric. Spray these with 505 spray. Lay the batting down inside the placement line. Lay the fabric on top of it. That's barely cut over. And now it's going to stitch the tack down, and then it'll just go and we'll start it and stitch the quilting. Okay, so now it quilted that design. Okay, so I'm ready to do the third one. I've threaded up with the pink thread, and it's just going to be the exact same thing. I don't think the pink showed up enough on this block, so I just backed the machine up and I'm going to go over it in the red color. Just the little bow design, quilting design, see if it shows up a little bit more. Yeah, that may make it show up a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, now next month I'm going to show you how to cut these down with the orange pop rulers and Kimberbell's spinning mat, but I forgot to bring it home, and so we'll do that next time. So this block, in the instructions it says to cut it down to the 6.5 by 8.5, and so basically that's this outside fabric placement line. So you can either use that as a guide from this side, or you can turn it over and do it from this side. Use your ruler. Don't just use that stitching line as a guide. Go ahead and kind of center it with your ruler, and this is kind of where the orange pop rulers make it a little bit easier, because you can center it in those. But just cut, make sure the 8.5 and the 6.5 are on that outside line, and then just trim it down. And then the ornament blocks, they were trimmed down to 6.5 by 6.5. So now I'm just lining it up and making sure it's 6.5 by 8.5. And then the filler blocks need to be trimmed down to the 2.5 by 2.5. So I'm just going to do the same thing, go on the back side and use that outside stitching line as a guide. And I'm still going to use the ruler to line it up and trim them down to 2.5. We're going to hurry up and get this done. We're going to trim all three of these down to 2.5 by 2.5. And here they all are completed. So we did the 2 Christmas trees that are going to be in the January folder, and then the 2 ornaments that are in the promotional folder or the bonus folder, and then the 3 filler blocks are in the January folder also.